There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Oh, hi there. I don't know whether you can hear me from here, but I'm just pulling up the aerial and anchoring it here on this bench. It's not an elaborate aerial, it's fed with twin feeder, and it goes up, it's suspended on a post there with a bird feeder, then it continues on up, and yes, it goes to the tree down there, and it's got two arms, each about 35 feet long, and then of course the feeder would again be about 40 feet long, so we're talking about 70 feet per arm. Yes, it's a doublet antenna and used for amateur radio, but not today. We're going to use it to receive some broadcast radio signals in AM from nearby stations for a certain purpose. Well, of course, we've been doing a lot of work with these early pickups and arms. We haven't done this one yet. This is a European one, and the needle screw's missing, and it's a very strange thread. It does work, but we haven't got round to that one yet. But one day we started thinking, you know, we've restored and demonstrated to you several late 1920s and early 1930s disc record pickups, electric pickups. But I just suddenly thought one day, when we play them back to test them, we play them back through a modern or a relatively modern amplifier and modern speakers, and that tells us roughly what they sounded like, and some of them sound quite nice and some of them are pretty ropey. But the question arose, well, what did they sound like in 1930 or 1928 or whenever they were made? You know, did they sound any good? Of course they would be in new condition then, not like 80 or 90 years later. And so we had this idea of looking at replaying sound from, shall we say, 1930 as a ballpark through contemporary equipment. And we did have some which we never thought of putting it together before, and it would hinge mostly around the loudspeakers that were used at the time. These of course were based on the telephone earpiece, which had been around since the 1870s. Seen here is a pair of headphones, and they're very, very simple inside. Underneath the cap there's a thin steel diaphragm which we've slid off, and there you see two small electromagnets, and the voltage representing the sound passes through, causes magnetic flux which attracts the diaphragm, and the sound is reproduced. So there was a much larger version of a headphone with a larger diaphragm and a more powerful magnet, and then a horn rising up out would project the sound into the room, and the horn does not amplify the sound, it merely sends it out into the room, and the bigger it is, the more efficiently it does that. So it is louder, but the horn does not amplify, which is rather counterintuitive, isn't it? And we've actually got one of these horn speakers, quite an elaborate one. It's the S.G. Brown model H1, dating from the mid-1920s, and it's got a better drive unit in the base, which has got a balanced reed. So this was quite an expensive speaker of its time. We did use it once before, but then we used it as a kind of joke. Oh, it isn't really fair, we're going to put it through its paces now more seriously. Well, as program material we are going to use AM radio, and we're going to pretend there's a guy back in 1930 who at home has got a modest, very modest radio, which is actually a crystal set with one valve added, and he knows that that's quite a powerful valve and it should be able to drive a loudspeaker. And he's just bought this speaker, shall we say, second hand. It might still have cost him £2, which is like probably a week's wages, and he's anxious to try it out. So we'll now look at his circuit and then see it in reality. Well, here's a chap's basic crystal set, and it's got an aerial coupling capacitor there. 500 puff is rather large, but that's the only one I've got. Then we've got a small coil here for the medium wave, a much bigger one for the long wave. The station on that frequency is only 198 kilohertz. So there's a switch which will short that one out so that we can just get the medium wave. Here is the 500 puff tuning capacitor, and there is the germanium diode, and goes into a pair of high impedance headphones, and of course that's a standard crystal set. Well, we know about those, but he's also now added a valve. Well, the valve's been installed now, so the audio from the diode goes into the grid, the triode valve, and it has a filament, of course, which requires 2 volts DC to light it up. And then in the anode circuit we've got a choke which prevents the amplified audio from going up there. It's deflected and goes through this 2 microfarad capacitor into a high impedance speaker, which is our brown speaker. The purpose of the 2 microfarad capacitor is to stop the 90 volts DC getting into the loudspeaker, because that would cook it up. So really the circuit is amazingly simple, and let's have a look at it in real life. And here is his wireless set. Here's the coil. It's in 2 parts, but it's all one coil. Then there's a switch here which switches out the big section to give us the medium wave. The aerial comes in at the back, goes, and the coil of course goes into the tuning capacitor, and this is a quite an old-fashioned sort of one. We've also got an aerial coupling capacitor up there, and then we go from there. Here's the crystal diode, and of course we've cheated because we're using a modern germanium diode. He would have had to fiddle with a cat's whisker, and it's going into the valve. And then here above, the brown looks like a transformer, but it's a choke, a 100 Henry choke. And then there's, can you just see, there's 2 capacitors there where the 2 microfarad output capacitor is. The reason they're 2 because I haven't got a 2 microfarad. This is 2 1 microfarads. And then here's the high tension battery, which consists of 14 PP3 batteries, which is giving us, these rechargeables are going down a bit, so we've only got about 90 volts, 90 to 100 volts coming out here. And here at the back is a 6 volt lead acid accumulator that goes through these resistors here, which drops the 6 volts down to the 2 volts which the valve needs. So let's try it out. Well, we're all set up now, and we're on the long wave. I've connected up the high tension battery, the valve is lit, and we can now tune in the BBC Radio 4 on 198 kilohertz.
To Jewish leaders, promising he will be their ally in the fight against anti-Semitism.
In the next few minutes, 2 separate events at Westminster, which will ventilate in their own different ways.
No, this is the 5 o'clock news.
In the Labour Party, allegations which go all the way to the top. At 5:30, a demonstration outside Parliament led by Jewish people angry at what they see as Jeremy Corbyn siding with anti-Semites.
Okay, now we'll switch over to the media. So in other words, we can hear that speech. We'll come to the quality of it later. Let's go on to the medium wave now. And on the medium wave there are 3 stations, the first of which is BBC Radio 5 Alive, which is about here.
Showing Australians doing unusual things and saying, what was all this about? Why did Warner have a bandage around the palm of his hand?
He's actually had plasters on his hands for some, well, certainly a couple of years, and I think that's probably to do with just the bangs you get on the fingers as a batsman, which can happen, pretty regularly.
And then next down is a sports station.
I don't know what he looked like. It was embarrassing to me. And then you got Deontay Wilder, who beat Ortiz the other week.
This station is a bit weaker than the others. It's still coming through.
After some rounds, couldn't even lay a punch on it. And then all of a sudden he hit with one punch. And that was the end of the fight.
And now right at the bottom of the high end of the medium wave, we have real radio, which usually does rock music.
8 a.m. tomorrow morning on the Christian O'Connell Breakfast Show, and here's the elongated clip one more time for you. Good luck.
Mobile, putting you in control. Get the handset you want with a tariff and contract that suits you with Anytime Upgrade Flex. Terms and conditions apply.
The Christian O'Connell Breakfast Show.
All this week, we've got a great prize.
So I'm going to take the low tension off now,
You've got half a dozen more gems.
which will turn the radio off, because you don't have to switch the high voltage off, because if you stop the valve from being lit up, of course no current can flow, so you switch it off by removing the filament voltage. Well, that was a miscellany of stuff. Let's consider it. I have to say that by and large, not a lot of that program material is of much use to us in evaluating the performance of a 1920s loudspeaker. The speech is all right, but there's a lot of adverts and jingles, and there's speech with music in the background, and the classical music channel of the BBC is not on AM, it's on FM way up there. And the real radio that transmits the rock music, of course, a lot of rock music contains electric guitars, many of which are driven into distortion on purpose for musical effect, and that is not a suitable program material to evaluate any loudspeaker, let alone an old one. So what can we do? Now, many radio enthusiasts vintage radio enthusiasts have taken to having a small medium wave transmitter. So if you want the 50s, they want Cliff Richard, they want Elvis Presley, they want Bill Haley. And the 40s guys, they want swing music, they want Glenn Miller and stuff like that. And in the 30s, they want Bing Crosby and and all that sort of thing. I actually prefer the 20s, so my problem is fairly severe. But building a medium wave transmitter and it's got a range of say 100 yards and playing it can be picked up on the radio. And I understand that is legal in the United States, but it is not legal in the United Kingdom. And having held an amateur radio licence for 35 years, I don't want it taken off me. And you certainly can't build a medium wave transmitter legally. Well, are we downhearted? No! Because we've got a secret weapon. And here it is. It's a small lashed up board which has got in it two transistors, two N3904s, very common cheap transistors, and a few capacitors and resistors, a couple of 470 microhenry inductors there. The whole thing can be knocked up for perhaps a couple of quid, and this is built ugly on a piece of printed circuit board. And but what is it? Is it a transmitter? Is it a transmitter? No, it's a modulator. And there's a world of difference. It's a signal generator in effect. The first transistor is an oscillator on about 540 kilohertz, which is down the the long end of the medium wave band. And the second transistor is a modulator. If you feed some audio into it, it will be impressed upon the 540 kilohertz oscillation, and it becomes amplitude modulated, and it is fed by a screen wire directly into the aerial socket of our receiver. Therefore, none of it is radiated. It is not a transmitter. It is a modulator, which is equivalent to a signal generator, and we can feed it into our radio directly without any radiation whatsoever, so it is not a transmitter. And then we can feed whatever audio we like into it and hopefully hear it through our receiver. We're all set up now. You'll note that the output from the modulator passes via a screened cable into the antenna aerial socket, and it's going straight through. And I shall now start the file, which happens to be a Joe Venuti Blue 4 record of 1928, which I rather like, as many of us do. And then you'll note we have to tune it in. Here we go, fire up the computer source. You'll hear some distorted sound, but I'll now tune it in. And it's sounding rather promising, isn't it? Let's listen to it properly. It's a bit on the thin side, but it's very nice and clear, and it does begin to give us some idea of what stuff might have sounded like through that sort of speaker, you know, in the late 20s or 1930. So the video comes to a conclusion now, but in the next sequential part we'll go on to the next type of loudspeaker, the next most common type of speaker, which is one like this, and it does look exactly, well, pretty well exactly like a modern loudspeaker, but it's nothing to do with a modern loudspeaker. Those are all moving coil speakers. This is a moving iron loudspeaker, and it's practically extinct, so it's worthy of preservation. But in the meantime, all the best and take care, and see you again soon. Bye.